This is World to Win, bringing you the latest news and analysis from a socialist perspective. Welcome back, everyone, to World to Win, the broadcast by the International Socialist Alternative. My name is Toya. I have my co-host here, Yara, with us, and we have an exciting episode called Labor on the Move in Sub-Saharan Africa. We have a lot to talk about today, so we want to make sure you're sharing this broadcast. But of course, first subscribe to our channel, like, and hit the bell so that way you can get notifications every time we post a new video. Yara, I haven't seen you in a long time. How have you been?
Yeah, I've been well. I've missed you so much. It was so difficult without you here, but I'm happy that you're here for this really, really exciting episode of World to Win about labor struggles in Sub-Saharan Africa. I think all of our watchers around the world are going to be interested in this because I think we've heard so much about all of these, there was a wave of these struggles all across the continent, from South Africa to Nigeria. And I think it's going to be really interesting to talk to actual socialists on the ground in these countries to see, first of all, what's been happening, because it's quite hard to follow in the mainstream media in the West, at least. And also what's actually happening in response and how socialists are actually fighting against the capitalist class on the African continent. So to start this off, we talked to Daga from our section of the International Socialist Alternative section in Nigeria, who's going to tell us a little bit about the situation in Nigeria, but also generally about what's happening with the labor movement in Africa.
Thank you so much for being here today with us, Daga. I'm really excited to get the chance to actually talk with you. So my first question is, Sub-Saharan Africa seems less hit by the virus. There's a younger population in general, and, maybe this has to do with the lower population density, but can you talk a little bit about how the continent has dealt with the pandemic?
Well, let me say that even though there have been lower numbers of people who have died from the pandemic on the African continent, this does not in any way give a pass mark to how the ruling elites have behaved in relation, because the truth is that conditions are still far worse off. In the thick of the strike, there were strikes in a place like, in the thick of the pandemic, there were strikes by health workers in Nigeria, in a country like Mozambique, and I think in some other countries in West Africa, where health officers had to go on strike, demanding for appropriate facilities to be provided. There are no hand gloves. Africa had to wait for a billionaire from China to donate some of these items to the continent. So the truth is that the ruling elites, on the basis of their neoliberal capitalist system, have performed woefully. Before the pandemic, what was the state of conditions of the health facilities on the African continent? Using Nigeria as an example, the health workers have gone to a series of strikes over and over again to challenge the ruling elites to provide the necessary facilities to improve health conditions in this part of the world. This would be a good opportunity to tell members of the world that Nigeria has the highest numbers of infant mortality, the highest numbers of people who die from disease, from the 5 killer diseases, poliomyelitis, that has already been eliminated in all parts of the world. The numbers of people who die from malaria yearly goes in hundreds of thousands, possibly also the highest in the world. People die from road accidents, from the bad roads. In 1983, when the military took over power, there was this popular phrase they used, that our hospitals have become no longer consulting centers, but mortuaries. That statement by the military still exists, even after 40 years, when the military were in power and they have handed power to civilians. The health facilities are in a worse condition. But how then did Nigerians survive? How did Africans came out from the pandemic? Well, I don't want to join all of those who have said that maybe our body system is made differently or whatever. The truth is that it is not impossible that the conditions of existence here on the continent, that the people have been ravaged with so much ailment that adding one more to it was no longer an issue to people. Rather, people are dying from hunger and poverty. These are greater diseases that are in themselves made possible by the basis of a neoliberal capitalist system, where the resources of the country are frittered away by very few members of the billionaire club.
Yeah, I think that really leads me to the next question about the economy, because I think, you know, when we see the situation in Africa, it's obviously a little bit different to the situation worldwide, but even around the world, the economy has been hit massively by this pandemic. And I think according to the World Bank, the Sub-Saharan economies will decline by 3.3% over 2020. That's insane. And due to the pandemic, and like, you know, they also predict that 40 million more people will end up in extreme poverty. It's just unbelievable. So what do you think about that? Do you think that those predictions are right? And how is Africa going to even deal with that?
Well, let me say, when it comes to the economy, it's important to inform ourselves and to state that ever before the coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic reared its head on the scene of the world economy has not been in any different, better shape. In Nigeria, for example, a new budget has been launched, and the ruling elites are saying that the difficulties that they're encountering in this budget is a fallout of the coronavirus pandemic. It's important to state that capitalism has performed woefully, and that even before coronavirus pandemic was launched on the world scene, a majority of working people all over in the world were suffering various forms of one difficulty or the other. So this attempt to now use the coronavirus pandemic as what has launched the world into a critical situation should be rejected. If any point is to be made, is that capitalism itself is responsible, has created this situation whereby we are unable, to deal with a disease, that if society were appropriately organized and managed appropriately, we would have been able, to resist it. The numbers of people that are dying, and the world is returning to a second wave, that this would not have been possible. The state of the economy in Nigeria and in Africa is in a very terrible state. Nigeria is a good example. It's an oil-producing country. Unfortunately, if over a period of 40, 50 years of launching a neoliberal program of diversifying the economy, the ruling elites have failed to diversify the economy. All of the wealth that has accrued to the country from oil has not been plunged back as a basis of industrializing the country or developing all other sectors of the economy. And what this clearly means is that ultimately the ruling elites, will attempt and will continue to shift the burden of the current failure of their system to the mass of the working people. And this is where the entirety of the working masses, will have no choice ultimately, whether the labor leaders are willing to provide leadership or not. They will independently come into the arena of the crisis. As we speak, the country is witnessing an 8-day movement. Today is day 8 of the movement of young people on the streets of Nigeria protesting against police brutality, providing an inspiring example for the entirety of the working class, that this is exactly what they should be doing, inspiring more and more people, to come into the streets and lead a struggle of the mass of working people against the attack of the ruling elites, to transfer the burden of the failure of their system on the mass of the working people.
Speaking of, all of this resistance and the movements that are being built, which is insanely inspiring. I love seeing the videos and the photos and reading all about it. But what are your perspectives going forward? Are we going to see are we going to see struggle continue? Are people going to stay in the streets, or are they going to start to retreat? Are they going to start to get tired? What are your perspectives?
Well, it is clear that as the movement becomes more bolder, the ruling elites too will become more repressive. That can be easily envisaged. But even that prognosis should not debar us from encouraging more and more people to take to the streets. It's important to raise a huge popular slogan, to call for the trade union leaders to call for a 24 hours general strike as a basis of supporting the struggles on the street, to call for an end to police brutality. The key slogans must be very, very clear. We want an end to the illegal arrest of young people of citizens of this country by the police hierarchy, basically to make more money for what? For themselves. They want an end to all of the continuous roadblocks. Nigeria is one big country where every 50 meters that you walk, you are going to meet a checkpoint. And the police are not looking for criminals. They are not looking, for anything. Their basic one demand is that you must give them money. So the movement is calling for an end of all of this. It's calling for SARS, the notorious anti-armed robbery squad, to be banned. The government has announced by proscribing it, but in place of it, what has happened is that a new name has been announced, and which is why an organization like ours is challenging. There is a need to challenge this with a call for police, for a trade union rights for police officers in Nigeria. It's also important to demand for a democratic control and management of the conduct and affairs of the police by various communities in which they are established, by elected social organizations that must include the working class and various poor stratas that live in that community to manage the affairs of the police union. In going forward, we must say that these young people that have been labeled as lazy by the current president of this country are demonstrating to themselves and to young people in the African continent that they are not lazy. They are not lazy. Nigeria has a 21.7 million unemployed young people. That's the figure of unemployment, which combines about 3 African countries together. That in itself is a huge population, and these millions of people, as represented by those on the street, are using their hunger currently to announce that they want to reclaim their country. They want a new Nigeria where those who are powerful will not use the police as a tool, as an instrument of oppressing those who don't have anything in their hands. It's also another opportunity for us as socialists to clearly come out with a slogan to win a new young generation of young people who are coming to the arena of struggle, to the banner of socialism, to make it quite clear that these issues are not going to go away until society is transformed, until a socialist revolution is carried out. And a socialist revolution will not fall from the sky. But the struggles of young people on the street will serve as a huge inspiration ultimately to the working class and to all left forces to make recruitment, to build our forces. This is not impossible that in the coming period, the ranks of our organization will increase. Already we are making 1 or 2, 3 recruitments. Our forces don't thin. We are spreading them across all of the protest points in Lagos, in Abuja, in Ibadan, in Osogbo, to ensure that we'll be able to make more influences and more gains in all of this area. It is clear that with what is happening, we can beat our chest and say the prospect for struggles, for movement in the future are bright. Socialism will grow, and ultimately we can beat our chest and be happy that we are getting more closer to the drawing of huge inspiration. This is October. In the next 2-3 weeks, we'll be going to the anniversary of the October Revolution. There can be no better time to draw these key lessons for a working class movement all over the world. Struggle is possible. Transformation of society is possible. That transformation is only possible on the basis of millions of working people coming to the arena of struggle with a clear program to take over political power from the members of the Billionaire Club and put in place a government of the ordinary working people that will be committed to using the resources of society to build houses for the poor, to construct roads, to provide free public funded education, instead of ensuring that all of these basic necessities of human existence are object of making profit for members of the Billionaire Club. The new society and the new world is emerging on the heroic struggles of young people on the streets of Lagos in all parts of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Toya. I don't know what to say after this. It's so inspirational to hear what you're saying, and I think it's a really good plan for the future and also for what we need to do now. And I want to ask you about the strike action that's going on in Nigeria right now in this context. So I know that there was struggle by local communities and also by trade unions against doubling of electricity prices and also some increase in petrol prices. And I know there was a strike that was announced for the end of September.
Well, extremely painful that the labor leaders had to call off the general strike fixed for September 28th. The ruling elites have gone ahead to increase the pump price of electricity. The electricity tariff. They've also gone ahead to increase the pump price of fuel. And this in itself is why this anger on the streets is growing and will grow ultimately. Nigeria is an oil-producing country. It makes huge wealth and resources from oil, and yet happens to be one of the countries where fuel price, the pump price of fuel is sold at the highest figure compared to the income of the mass of the working people. But unfortunately for the labor leaders, at the very eve of the general strike, when effective mobilization had been done, the labor leaders called off the strike on the very day of the strike. This in itself was extremely demoralizing to the entirety of the working class. But at the same time, just a week after this, we saw another good example coming from South Africa, where the labor leaders had called a 24 hours general strike. And interestingly, in that strike, with a click-less slogans on the streets in Johannesburg, in all parts of South Africa, with workers demanding that the unions could start to break their link with the ANC. This is the future. This is the music of the future of the working class coming into full awareness that it is a class of its own and that it must build a political platform of its own to confront the bourgeoisie, to confront the ruling elite. In Nigeria, where are we in relation to these prognoses that are put forward? The labor leaders have shied away from taking up their historical responsibility for the mass support of the working people. But ultimately, with the movements that are coming in on the streets, and the slogan is already growing that the issues confronting young people in Nigeria is not just a question of police brutality. So it is clear that as the labor leaders refuse and shy away from taking their historical responsibility, that the working class, drawing full inspiration from what the youths are doing on the streets, will use that independently to arrive at the clear-cut necessary consciousness, and ultimately, the working class in their thousands and in their millions will come on the street. Like you are rightly pointed out, even with that strike called off, as we speak now, the universities are on strike. All the universities in Nigeria are closed down. This strike has been on since February. With the pandemic over, the lecturers have refused to return back to school, to return back to their classes. Health workers are also going to strike. Judiciary workers have also announced the possibility of a strike. All of these strikes in workplaces will provide key basis for the working people to draw the conclusion that they are a powerful force collectively and united together. And that is the key lessons that Nigerians are drawing from the movement on the street. That it's only when they organize themselves in their millions, in their numbers, that the ruling elites will listen to them.
Thank you so much, Daga. And I think it's really important that we, get this message out there, especially to all the young people who are hitting the streets. I know the International Socialist Alternative, we're building in Africa. And so I'm wondering if maybe we can just end today by you talking to the millions of young people who are looking for a political alternative. What is that political alternative and how can they get involved with the movement that we are trying to build?
We want to say the ISA is a platform organized in all the continents of the world. We want to commend the millions of young people that took up the movement, which has inspired a series of movements in all parts of the world. The Black Lives Matter in the US, which has created a new phenomenon, even in all sporting fields activities. These various struggles of young people in all of the world will continue to serve as an inspiration. But it is important to note that there will be struggles. Human beings, centuries past, centuries to come, have known series of struggles. Indeed, governments have been overthrown by mass movement. As we speak in Africa, in the course of this pandemic, a mass movement has overthrown a government in Mali. The same thing was done in a place like Egypt, where a mass movement ultimately brought an end to a dictatorial regime. But that has not seen the basis of transformation of society. Gradually, young people will draw the conclusion that their anger on its own and in their strength is not enough. There's a need to understand how society functions. What is that philosophy? With what ideas do the ruling elites in all countries of the world rule and govern society? They operate and govern society on the basis of a philosophy of making and appropriating profit. of ensuring that the resources of the world is transformed to a private property for their enjoyment and for their luxury. And this is why we put against this philosophy, this bourgeois philosophy of capitalism of the ruling elites, of members of the Billion Club. The working people put forward against this class the ideas of socialism. Socialism simply refers to that idea, that philosophy of organizing society, using the resources of society, not for the benefit of making profit for some few private profiteers, but to be appropriate these resources, manage them democratically, and use them to meet the needs of the mass of the working people. It is only on the basis of this socialist alternative as an idea to capitalism that it is possible. And we don't need to go too far. We don't need to go into the sky to see what socialism is. In how we organize ourselves, even from our family unit, we see that we cooperate with ourselves, we share our resources together. What human beings, what socialists are saying is that this individual basis of cooperating with ourselves must be extended to manage the entirety of the resources of society, to manage the economy in a way and manner that all stratas of society will benefit appropriately. The working class is the producer of the wealth and of the resources of the world. And it is to the working class that we must appeal to, we must educate, we must enlighten to take up the struggle of appropriating the resources of society, of taking up the task to become the new managers of the resources of the world. This is the only type of society that can guarantee ultimately that lives can be built in a way and manner that more and more millions of people, the billions of people all over the world, will begin to have a different life and will begin to have a better life for all of us. Socialism is the way forward. We want to tell young people who are enjoying the arena of struggle that we applaud their heroism on the street. We applaud their anger against this system of exploitation and this system of poverty. But ultimately, this anger needs to be matched with a clarity of ideas. And the only possible clarity of ideas that is possible in moving humanity forward is the ideas of socialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daga. I think this was so inspirational, so interesting to hear about what's happening in Africa, but specifically Nigeria, and especially from someone like you who's been on the streets, active. And I think this is a shout to everyone, not just in Africa, to go and build for socialism. And I think that's incredibly strong and incredibly inspirational and important. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I always love hearing from Daga. It's so interesting to hear on the ground experience of what's going on in Nigeria. Next, we have a segment from Ori in the Ivory Coast. He sent us a message about what's going on there with striking workers.
Ce qui s'est passé, c'est que là où les gens avaient prévu faire 72 heures de grève à SCCI, sous la menace des patrons aidés en cela par la gendarmerie, ils n'ont fait qu'une seule journée d'arrêt de travail. Ils ont donc été licenciés individuellement suite à ces demandes d'explication à SCCI sans préavis. C'est comme ça, nous sommes rentrés en contact avec des camarades là-bas et nous avons entrepris des mouvements de contestation. On cherchait à populariser le mouvement en cherchant à informer l'opinion publique à travers des activités de tractage et du collage d'affiches pour expliquer les raisons de la colère des travailleurs. Et donc, les patrons qui ont vu que leur image prenait, ont cédé dans un premier temps en acceptant de recevoir ses camarades par les fameux inspecteurs du travail. Ces camarades ont reçu leurs différents droits selon le temps passé dans l'entreprise et ceux qui voulaient donc partir sont partis et ceux qui voulaient rester sont restés. Donc le premier avantage à tirer ce mouvement, c'est que désormais les licenciements abusifs, les camarades qui sont restés au sein de l'entreprise se sont rendus compte que les fameux délégués du personnel n'étaient que des employés, des patrons, juste utiles pour domestiquer les travailleurs et les empêcher de manifester et revendiquer un quelconque droit. Les travailleurs se sont rendus compte désormais qu'ils pouvaient à tout moment s'organiser et revendiquer sans forcément passer par les fameux délégués du personnel. La direction de l'entreprise, les responsables de SCCI qui ont dû se plier. Mieux aujourd'hui, les travailleurs de SCCI ont la latitude de s'organiser, de revendiquer, et même les patrons ont été obligés de leur accorder certains droits, notamment le droit, les primes de logement, les primes risques. Et aujourd'hui, nous apprenons que dans plusieurs entreprises de cette zone, il y a plusieurs entreprises où certains droits ont été accordés à des travailleurs, notamment le droit de se syndiquer, de s'organiser. Et même la fameuse inspection du travail, qui était habituellement, qui se portait comme avocat des travailleurs, a senti aujourd'hui à tel point qu'elle n'est plus utile pour les travailleurs eux-mêmes. Et aujourd'hui, notamment quand il y a un problème entre employés et employeurs, les employeurs eux-mêmes peuvent aller directement se présenter devant des juridictions. Au niveau de Carrefour, en tout cas, il y avait une organisation assez intéressante à la base. Il s'est trouvé que des camarades partis de notre société de distribution voisine à Carrefour avaient déjà une expérience d'organisation. Arrivé donc à Carrefour, ces camarades ont pris le temps de réunir tous les documents administratifs nécessaires pour créer un syndicat, une organisation de travailleurs, ce qu'ils ont fait discrètement. L'organisation qu'ils ont mise en place discrètement a surpris la direction. C'est une nouvelle boîte pour le pays. C'était l'un des symboles de l'émergence, surtout que les gouvernants, le chef de l'État en tête avec son épouse, avaient participé à l'inauguration de cette maison de distribution. Alors donc, lorsque les camarades ont engagé le mouvement, la direction de Carrefour voulait utiliser le volet administratif en usant du fait que les camarades n'étaient pas constitués légalement et ainsi casser le mouvement. Mais il était déjà tard. Et le mouvement qui était prévu sur 3 jours, en tout cas, a été médiatisé. C'est chaque jour devant les sites, avant même que les camarades ne commencent les piquets de grève, qu'un porte-parole est désigné. Aujourd'hui, notamment le statut de ce qu'on appelle les chauffeurs qui n'avaient pas de statut de l'entreprise, qui étaient des travailleurs informels en quelque sorte, aujourd'hui, un statut leur a été reconnu. Et je vous ai dit que les camarades ont quand même pris tous les niveaux des travailleurs, qu'ils soient en CDI, qu'ils soient des réonistes, qu'ils soient des caissières. Ce sont toutes les nomenclatures, je veux dire, des travailleurs de cette entreprise-là qui ont été intégrés au mouvement. C'est ce qui est impressionnant en fait. Les chauffeurs, les réonistes, les balayeurs de l'entreprise, les caissières. Donc, ces camarades-là, aujourd'hui, ont pu obtenir d'abord la gestion de la caisse et de leur mutuelle, ce qui était aux mains des patrons. Ils ont eu la latitude de choisir eux-mêmes une société d'assurance de leur choix. Aujourd'hui, ils sont libres de s'organiser et ils ont tellement bien organisé les choses parce qu'il y a eu des assemblées générales qui ont été tenues après le mouvement pour pouvoir suivre de près les négociations qui se déroulent avec la direction, ce qui est une première d'ailleurs. Donc les camarades s'organisent dans ce sens pour réagir et nous sommes en train de voir comment est-ce que nous pourrons également leur apporter notre soutien. Ils ont surtout apprécié en tout cas notre intervention et je veux dire le fait que nous les ayons aidés à réussir leur mouvement. Je veux dire que c'est quand même la première fois que la direction de la toute puissante CFAO soit mise à rude épreuve par une organisation de travailleurs. D'abord, ça fait remonter la confiance des camarades. Exagéré, il faut dire que le mouvement des camarades de Carrefour a entraîné une sorte de contagion dans les autres sociétés de distribution qui sont voisines à Carrefour.
I want to again thank Ori for sending us that video from the Ivory Coast. It's so great to hear experiences of people all over the world. And I mean, right now, you know, we're paying for this crisis which is built into the capitalist system. You know, the working class were facing countless attacks as austerity budgets and policies are implemented. But before the pandemic, these policies were failing to provide adequate healthcare. You know, like we want to blame everything on the pandemic, but we have to be honest. The pandemic was the straw that broke the camel's back. Problems with housing and cuts to social services. And this has really left the majority of the working class and society unprepared for an actual public health crisis. And we've seen severe economic consequences throughout the world. But particularly in South Africa, millions of people have gone without work, adequate food, sanitation, the list goes on. But we've seen mass demonstrations by the Trade Union Federation, COSATU, in support of working class control of wages and of public finances, as well as protections in the face of the pandemic, which is a huge first step. So next, we're going to go to our interview with one of our members of the Workers' and Socialist Party in South Africa.
So, hi, Newton. It's really nice to have you here. And I wanted to ask, a more general question. We have this pandemic all around the world, and I want to know what's the situation with coronavirus in South Africa right now?
Yeah, but I think a background is in order. It must be understood, it must be noted that the South African health system, even prior the pandemic, was in trouble. It was after the 2.5 decades of the neoliberal policies pursued by the ANC-led government that dismantled not only the healthcare system, but the public schooling system and so on and so forth. And therefore, with the coming of the pandemic, it was clear to everyone, not less to the regime itself, that it would be catastrophic. And I suspect that's one of the reasons why the regime itself moved swiftly, relatively swiftly, I should say, to institute a lockdown. The logic behind it, of course, was that in doing so, you'd reduce the rate of the spread of infection, and then by so doing, allow the state to come up with makeshift emergency ways of dealing with the expected upsurge in the infections themselves. And therefore they did that. They instituted a lockdown from the 21st of March this year to this day. I mean, today we are at level 1. The lockdown is virtually gone now. But yeah, it has been a 6-month-long lockdown. And it seems, at least if you compare what was expected in terms of the numbers, what was expected when we reached the peak, which was predicted that it would be in August, and what is actually the actual numbers, which I will come to later on, you could say, well, the regime has succeeded, because what is beginning to happen now, in fact, during the lockdown, the government now built what it called field hospitals in preparation for the upsurge in the infections as soon as they open. And what is actually happening now is that those makeshift hospitals in almost all provinces are beginning to be dismantled. Of course, there are provinces that are saying, well, we are not going to dismantle them because we are not sure as to whether we want to have the second wave, and therefore we will not but others are beginning to dismantle them, those makeshift hospitals, because now they are just excess beds. The expected number of people who would have occupied them are just not forthcoming. So in that sense, you could say the regime was successful in containing the spread of the infection itself. So that's how things stand at the moment. The economy is virtually open. The schools are open, despite feeble attempts by, well, the teachers' unions and some community activists to try and prevent the schools from reopening. The schools are open. The economy, as I've said, is at a level 1 alert lockdown, which is virtually everything is open. So that's how things stand at the moment.
Thank you for that. I think this is really helpful to understand the context of what's happening in South Africa right now. And obviously there was a huge strike that was organized. Workers from all major union federations turned up on the 7th of October for the hashtag COSATU National Strike. And I heard that there were slogans and placards that were demanding jobs against privatization of state-owned enterprises, and also interestingly chants calling for the end of corruption and gender-based violence. So can you tell us a little bit about that strike and the run-up to it? What's led to it? What's the situation with the strike?
Well, in the main, the strike is underpinned by the boiling anger, not only in organized labor, but in communities, youth activists, gender activists, and so on and so forth, which comes as a result of the economic crisis that, let's be clear, predated COVID and the lockdown. See, when they speak about what is currently happening in the economy, the bourgeois analysts and economists want to present it as though everything was rosy prior to the lockdown. But I think it's important for us to first look at what was the situation prior to COVID hitting the shores of South Africa, as it were. The South African economy, for instance, was in recession. Its second recession under the leadership of a former unionist, now turned billionaire president, Cyril Ramaphosa. The investor confidence was at its lowest in the country. In fact, the capital formation, as they say, had moved from an annual growth of 9% to a mere 0.6%. And therefore, that tells you that the capitalists themselves here in South Africa had no confidence whatsoever in the profitability of their system. So it meant they were no longer investing in new machinery, in businesses, and in factories, and so on and so forth. And therefore, that was the situation here. Moreover, you had an unemployment rate of 10.2 million people unemployed, right? Over 30.4 million people were living on less than 41 rand a day, right? So these were the things that were happening. Mental illness, physical and mental illnesses were skyrocketing. Crime, drug abuse, gender-based violence were on the rise prior to the lockdown. This was what was happening prior to the thing. Now, fast forward 6 months later, after the state had instituted a brutal level 5 lockdown, which was imposed by a massive deployment of the army, especially in townships and also in squatter camps, because you wouldn't have done it any other way. Those places are clustered in such a way that the question of social distances is just ridiculous. You had to take the army to go and impose the thing. After that, after all of that, then you fast forward to 6 months later. You have now, it is said during that lockdown, over 3 million jobs have been lost. The economy has plunged, has declined by 51% of annualized growth. And of course, what is meant by that, as we all know, is that if the economy continues on this trajectory, then we are going to have the economy, plunging by 51%. But of course, given that the ANC insists on the policies that it has always advocated for and always implemented, that is to say the neoliberal austerity programs, and also the insistence on selling state-owned entities, and also refusing to fill vacancies in the public sector like teachers, nurses, and so on, there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't expect that the economy will plunge as the projection stipulates. So out of that boiling anger, as a result of that, you had the discussion, the strike you referred to was preceded by the discussion between the leadership of COSATU and SAFTU in the main, right? And this discussion was necessitated, I should say, by not only the pressure from the rank and file as a result of the dire economic situation I've outlined earlier, but also by the shameless looting of the 500 billion rands that was intended to be a COVID relief fund by the ANC top brass and those related to them, and those related and associated with them. And also the surge in gender-based violence and so on and so forth. And that, therefore, I should say, it pressured the union leadership to sit and try and find a way to come up with a joint program to be able to address these issues. And therefore, out of that, I'm given to understand that COSATU had already set out a date for the strike, which was the 7th of October, to which you referred in your question. And therefore, SAFTU, but not only SAFTU, NACTU and FEDUSA endorsed and joined in the strike that was held on the 7th of October. And as you quite correctly pointed out, workers had placards which read "Stop Corruption" and so on and so forth. And there's a significance to this in the coming together of workers across federations, but not only across federations, in communities and in community organizations and so on. There's a significance to this, because the last time it ever happened that workers across federations came together in a joint program to demand the improvement, as it were, of their livelihoods was prior 1994, right? And with it means it was prior the democratically elected government, was during apartheid. So it is unprecedented, therefore, if you take as your starting point 1994, for workers across federation to come together and demand a change in their lot. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think this is fascinating, and like we obviously live in unprecedented times. Everyone's joking about using this word so much, but I think all of these kind of examples around the world and around Africa specifically, I think in this period is just so inspirational for everyone. And I think this is a real show of strength, like you said. It's something that hasn't happened before apartheid. And I was wondering, how can we take this big show of strength and move it forward to get some, tangible results? Like what is the way forward for workers in South Africa?
Well, it must be pointed out, it is often mistakenly stated that the combativity of the South African working class has gone down. It's not true, actually. There are almost daily protests in community service delivery protests, in strikes at the workplace, in students taking to the street to demand free education, and so on and so forth. The only problem, of course, has always been that these struggles are happening in isolation, right? Those ones struggle for water there, those ones electricity there, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it becomes of critical importance that based on the joint program, rather based on the coming together of COSATU and SAFTU, but not only them, right? FEDUSA and NACTU and community activists, gender activists, youth, and so on, to come together to pave a way forward, right? To come together, have a discussion on a joint program to be able, therefore, to take the struggle of the working class forward. Because as things stand, the regime is hell-bent on its austerity program. In fact, just yesterday, Ramaphosa was announcing his recovery plan. And of course, there was nothing new in that. Moreover, the Minister of Finance, who's forever explicit, it does not matter how all others try to hide what the regime's intentions are. He himself will always tell you what it is. And he constantly says, tough decisions must be taken. And what is meant by that? It is meant that, well, state-owned entities must be sold to private individuals. There must be a cut of what they call the bloated wage bill. That is to say, the vacancies in teachers, nurses, doctors must not be filled. Moreover, you must in fact retrench them, and you must freeze their wage increases. And he always, of course, he talks about all these measures which are intended, therefore, to squeeze the working class. And therefore, it becomes of importance that the process that was initiated by SAFTU and COSATU prior to the 7th of October be broadened to include, as I have said, community activists, gender activists, youth activists in universities, colleges, high schools, and so on, to be able to sit down, pave a way forward which will eventually see the overthrow of capitalism. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Newton. I think this is really inspirational, and I think it also explains really well the situation in South Africa and, you know, the way that this pandemic has hit, but also kind of got workers together in a way that hasn't been seen before in the last few decades. So thank you so much, and hope to hear from you again soon on the show.
Thanks. It was really nice.
It has been such a good show, hearing from, you know, people around the globe, but especially on the African continent, about all the labor struggles that have been going on. So now to my favorite part of the show, the shout out of the week.
No. Wait a second. You're the only American I speak to, so I have to ask you some questions about the presidential race, okay? Are you ready?
Oh my goodness. It's a mess, Yara. That's all I can say. It is an absolute mess.
Why is this election so different to any other election? I don't remember any election being this crazy.
I mean, I don't want to just say it's 2020. Everything is crazy, but that does have a little bit to do with it. I mean, we have a president who has had to deal with this pandemic, and he's done a terrible job. In my opinion, he had a real opportunity to show how great he was making America again by helping with stimulus and keeping the economy going. But he gave us a one-time check of $1,200, and you had to have filed your taxes in the previous year to receive that. So that left, you know, millions of people, you know, undocumented immigrants, especially, without any sort of stimulus. And then on top of the fact that, you know, the working class was pretty much betrayed by Bernie Sanders when he dropped out of the race and told everyone to get behind Joe Biden. And so people are left with two very corporate candidates that are just uninspiring, very old white men.
It's just ridiculous that we're in a position now that people are talking so passionately about you have to vote for Biden, because if you don't, it's going to be Trump. And it's like, okay, but like, what am I actually voting for?
But then again, you sympathize a little bit because Trump is terrible, you know, and people have this short memory of like how bad things were under, you know, a Democrat. You know, they don't like to acknowledge the fact that while Joe Biden was vice president, the economy crashed and millions of people lost their homes. And the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, Michael Brown was killed during our first Black president, and people don't want to, either they've forgotten or they don't want to think about it. It's a hard situation.
And I think because there's no actual political alternative to it, then more people are pushed to vote for Trump. Because I think the most interesting thing is that people who are going to vote Biden, who are going to vote for Bernie, are now voting for Trump because they see him as a representative against the institution, against the establishment, which obviously is absolutely ridiculous. But again, like you say, you sympathize with that because people want change. And Trump, at least in the way that he's talking and acting, is very different to the way all of these, you know, suited men who don't tweet talk, even if his tweets are actually terrible. And speaking of his tweets, he also got COVID. Do you think that the way that he's tweeted his COVID experience has helped him, or do you think it's been against him?
Well, I mean, are we talking about, you know, his tweeting COVID literal experience? I mean, did you see the shitstorm when he was on all of those drugs? Like, I forget the numbers, but it's something stupid, like 50 tweets in 2 hours. Like, what did they have him on? I mean, it was insane. But I mean, if we think about Trump's COVID experience versus the working class's COVID experience, I mean, I know people who have been affected by this virus, and their experience was their family member going into a hospital and choking to death alone. Sometimes there was a nurse, sometimes there wasn't. You know, people being told that they can't go to the hospital unless they're on their deathbed. You know, people waiting in lines to get tested, medical bills, all of these things. Whereas Trump, who's against any form of socialized medicine, meaning Medicare for all is what we call it in the US, you know, any sort of governmental assistance or program for healthcare, that's what he got. He got a taxpayer funded healthcare experience, you know, and they showed pictures of his hospital room. I mean, that is insane on its own, but all on the, you know, working class's dime. And then he had the nerve to continue campaigning, to continue to go out, and then like downplay the effects of the virus as someone who actually caught it. It's criminal the way that he just gets up on stage or onto his phone, wherever he's tweeting from, and just lies to the working class. It's criminal.
And it's this ridiculous lie as well, because everyone could see that he was really sick. Like he came on the screen looking half dead, and then he's saying, "Oh, it's nothing. It's like the flu. You don't need to worry about this virus." It's like, yeah, your hospital room looks better than my house. Like obviously you're not worried about it. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I think especially the fact that he refused to go on a debate that was like virtual because he's so strong and powerful, as if he can't infect other people, is just like, you know, it just shows how much he doesn't care. But I think it also connects to all of these conspiracy theories that I think people around the world, like normal working class, ordinary people around the world, are being kind of pushed into, because there's such little respect and trust in the establishment, and especially in the medical establishment, because of how expensive it is in countries like the US especially, that people are just, yeah, why would we believe that this virus exists? Why would we believe that we need to worry about it? And it's a dangerous thing that's happening. And I think the conspiracy theorists on the rise right now is frightening. And I think it has to, like, we have to be sympathetic towards that, because
they're running candidates. These conspiracy theorists are running candidates. And like without any sort of a workers' party or some sort of alternative, it's mind-blowing. It's scary. It's scary.
Yeah, and like we have to be sympathetic towards that, because like, yes, like there is a reason not to trust the establishment. It's just the conclusions that are being drawn by those interests of the far right, the interests of people like Trump, rather than the interest of the working class, to look at the science and also at the benefit and health of the majority rather than the profits of a tiny minority. So I want to ask you, what happened in these debates? Why are they significant? Are they significant?
Yeah, I mean, usually the vice president debates, you know, it's just like kind of a showy thing that happens. But this one was, you know, a lot different because, one, the age of the candidates, and two, it like their weaknesses in that like maybe they won't make it another 4 years. I mean, Trump had COVID, Biden clearly is touching with, you know, dementia. But the corporate media, unfortunately, wanted to focus on the fly that was on Mike Pence's head, and all those memes were great. They were hilarious. But I think what this debate really showed was that Kamala Harris is being put forward by the Democratic Party as like, this is the real person that you're voting for. She's a woman of color. She'll be the first. And also she's younger, but she's going to unite the party, basically, is what they're trying to do. And she really showed how Joe Biden will not change. And I think one thing that especially young people have been talking about was her like announcement that Joe Biden will not ban fracking, which I thought was hilarious because like fracking kind of hasn't been what people are talking about right now. And like she brought it back up and it's like, oh yeah, fracking is terrible and you're not going to ban it. So that was insane. But, you know, she was trying to give crumbs to the movement basically by saying, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement is what I'm referring to, by saying that we're going to pardon or release all people that have been put in prison on marijuana crimes, nonviolent marijuana crimes, which of course should have been done. And actually many states are already doing this. I mean, just the liberal memes that have been put out about, you know, her side-eyed glance and like, you know, that's a Black mother when she looks like this, and just basing everything off of identity. And it's like, let's talk about the substance, you know?
Do you think that she's going to do it? Like, do you think all of these things, like the minor little crumbs of progressive policies, do you think they're going to happen if she becomes the vice president?
I mean, if we're going based off her record, you know, she's prosecuted mothers whose children have been truant at school. Your child doesn't go to school for whatever reason. Sometimes you may not even know. There has been all of these stories coming out about her record, like forcing trans women to go to men's prisons, all of these different things that are just, in regards to criminal justice, are just terrible. So I personally, I don't trust this woman to really be fair and effectively making criminal justice changes that we need in the US.
So I think that kind of leads me into my next question, which is the Supreme Court. We've heard that
Yara.
We've heard that Trump is picking a woman. Isn't it great?
First of all, can I just say my beef with the Democrats on this? Okay, these Democrats are like, this is the way that they're fighting. This is the way that they're fighting. Well, when Obama was in office, we didn't try to put forward a Supreme Court justice because he was leaving office, and we thought that the next president should choose it. Democrats, you should have. You should have tried to put someone as a Supreme Court justice. Like, what is this? The Democrats are always playing nice and expecting the Republicans to do the same. Like, we know that that's not going to happen, first of all. Second of all, yeah, great. He chose a woman, and he chose a woman in her 40s. I know they do things differently all over the world, but Supreme Court justices serve a life term. You know, it's like they're there until they're done and they do nothing else. But this woman, have you seen Handmaid's Tale, that show on Netflix? That show is based off her cult that she is a part of. This woman is against same-sex marriage. She's against a woman's right to choose what happens to her body, right? And she's being put forward as the woman candidate. This is a very scary time for especially young women to be witnessing this anti-woman cult member, Christian lady, be put forward in the highest court, system of the land.
That leads me, I guess, to my last question about this, which is, what do we do?
I've gotten so many messages from friends. A lot of them start off with, Toya, I don't want to vote for Joe Biden. So Socialist Alternative in the US, what we're calling for is a protest vote. And I think it's important to emphasize that we don't support Joe Biden and we don't support Donald Trump, but also many people feel like voting is the only power that they have. And it's the most politicizing time, every 4 years we vote for the president. To say not to vote at all would be a mistake and a missed opportunity, because by doing a protest vote and voting for Howie Hawkins, who's a member of the Green Party. And I know the Green Party means different things around the world, and I'll get to that. But a protest vote for Howie Hawkins shows and is registering, right, that we are not voting for the Democrat and we are not voting for the Republican. We want an alternative. And actually, a poll just came out that like some 60% of Americans want to see a party outside of the Democrats and the Republicans. Now, what we call for is a workers' party. And so this is a first step in registering that, especially for young people. It's really, young people are constantly blamed for not voting. And this gives, the Gen Zers who can vote and the millennials the ability to say, oh no, I'm voting, but I am not voting for those corporate candidates.
Obviously, I don't think anyone's saying that the Greens are going to win this election, but it's just, having the ability to say, we're not just sitting at home, we are actively participating in this. Of course, it has to come with organizing on the streets. It has to come with still going out, still protesting, and still doing what has to be done. And I think that leads us really well to the shout of the week this week, where we kind of highlight something that happened around the world that is super inspiring for socialists, I think. Because, obviously, we as socialists don't see the bourgeois legal system as the main thing that we want to focus on. But there's been a victory that I think any socialist, any anti-fascists even, would see as a major victory, which is, the conviction of the Golden Dawn Party, the fascist party in Greece. So on October the 7th, it was a day of historical importance for the working class, I think, with this context. And the trial of the party came to the conclusion that the neo-Nazi organization, the actual neo-Nazis, are convicted of being a criminal gang of fascist thugs and murderers, which is what they are. But, it's very rare to see the establishment admit something like that. Obviously, that is not what's written on the actual conviction note, but there's the free interpretation that we are going to give it. Now, for the 30 to 40,000 workers and youth who gathered outside of the courts in Greece, it was a moment of great joy, cheers, chants, also tears. It's so significant. And the high point of the strength is the appeal that in the region of 14% in the polls in 2013, Golden Dawn was ruling the streets. It's in a number of areas of Athens and other big cities. So when you compare the situation, when you see how big this party was and how people see it now, it's an incredible victory for the anti-fascist movement. It resulted in numerous armed attacks on migrants, and in 2013 there was also a murder of a well-known rap artist called Pavlos Thesis. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. Excuse my Greek. And this, left the state with no other choice than to take them to trial, because the state did not want to take them to trial. But that is why we have to not give the state a choice. And they've all obviously dragged it for years. We are a little bit after 2013 now. So in January of this year, Xakinima is our section of the ISA section in Greece, and other anti-fascist activists responded to the proposal of the public prosecutor to find Golden Dawn not guilty in this trial, and started a campaign under the slogan, "They're not innocent, put the Nazis in jail," which I think is a very basic thing, even for a democratic country. It's not big ask to put Nazi murderers in jail. And under this pressure of the anti-fascist movement, a number of unions, and also mainly in the public sector, decided on a 3-hour strike to assist workers. So I think that's really significant and shows kind of the strength that strikes and the labor movement can have on the day of sentencing. And I think it's this strong anti-fascist movement that led to the sentencing of Golden Dawn. We can't be naive about it. The courts, we know for a fact, did not want to convict. The state did not want to put this trial in the first place, put it on in the first place. And the leadership of the party was sentenced to 13 years in prison, which is an incredible victory again. And this doesn't mean that the danger of fascist forces in Greece or anywhere else is gone, but we want to give this big shout out to the anti-fascist movement in Greece and to the anti-fascists in Greece as well, showing how to build a balance of forces to deal this massive blow to the far right. And I think that's really inspirational for socialists and anti-fascists all around the world when we see, the far right rising and rising and rising. And it's terrifying, I think, even for activists that have been activists for so long, to see them rising. And this, this moment of victory is something that we should all and can all be inspired by. So I think that is really, really amazing, and well done to our comrades in Greece, but also anyone who's participated in those protests.
So I want to thank everyone who participated in our show today. We had a great discussion. We learned a lot, and to hear about the inspirational work that they're doing in Greece. Unfortunately, the corporate media doesn't talk enough about it, and so we have to do our due diligence and spread the word of the victories. So we'll be back next week with our show, like always. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. Throw a few comments in there, and maybe we can get back to you next week answering any questions that you may have had. I want to thank everyone again, my co-host Yara, and see you all next week, same time, same place.